This is our 16th lecture. The annual NEU lecture in Northern Ireland was inaugurated in 2006 when Baroness May Blood spoke to us, and the lecture has become an important part of our educational calendar. It's a place really where educationalists can meet and listen, share views in a milieu that's unashamedly intellectual, but nonetheless pragmatic as well. And it's a space that stimulates and challenges in equal measure. Obviously, in these times, the virtual setting offers less opportunity to discuss and directly debate with each other. But in lieu of that, what we've done is we've added on a respondents panel of four very bright educationalists who will respond to our speaker's lecture. You can, of course, contribute through the question and answers and the chat function, and feel free to do so. This year, we're very honoured to host Professor Tony Gallagher. I'm not going to try and attempt to summarise Tony's track record in educational research. It's all in your programme, if you've got that. But other than to say that he has been a stellar figure in our landscape for a very long time. He's a globally renowned academic expert on education in divided societies, and we're really privileged to have him speak to us tonight. Tonight, we've asked Tony to speak in the guise of the Minister for Education. I wish. Over to you, Minister, is what I would say.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thanks for the invitation. I just have a few slides that I want to put up, so I'll put them up first, and then I'll get properly started, if that's okay. So can I just check that those slides are appearing okay? Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Great. Okay. Well, again, thanks to the NEU for inviting me to give this talk this evening, and thanks also for a title which gives free rein to my imagination and aspiration, particularly because unlike an actual politician, I'm spared the challenge of having to be elected, or perhaps more important, re-elected. And before I begin, can I say that, to be perfectly honest, I'm just a little in awe of those people who put themselves into the public sphere by seeking public office. This is difficult in any society, and it has its distinctive challenges in a place like Northern Ireland. So while I might disagree with some or much of what they do and say, I want to put on record my admiration for their commitment and courage. Now, it's not possible to begin a presentation like this without some reflection on the crisis we've endured for well over a year now. This graph illustrates the scale of the disruption across 185 countries from the 1st of January 2020 to the end of April 2021 on a daily basis. Some countries started to close access to school buildings back in January last year, but it was in early March that this became a global phenomenon, and it's been a long, hard road since then. By the end of April of this year, a little under half of the countries still had access to schools closed, and a little under a fifth had their schools fully open. Just over a third of countries had reopened access to their schools, but with some significant adjustments to past or previous practice. And this is likely to be the modal category for some considerable time to come. This is, as the World Health Organization has suggested, the biggest disruption to education that the world has ever seen. And at its peak, over 90% of students worldwide were unable to enter school buildings. But as someone recently said, we've all been through the same storm, but we've not been in the same boat. The disruption has not been experienced equally, and that should inform our response. And this is something I want to return to towards the end of this presentation. But before identifying a series of priorities that I would pursue as Minister of Education, let me first lay out a number of core principles I would want to use as a framework to help guide any action that I would take. The first of those principles is an end to the search for silver bullets. Any proposal which came to me claiming to be the single measure which could solve a significant social or educational challenge will get short shrift. And part of the reason for this lies in the second principle, which is, secondly, an end to ourselves alone. Education can contribute to solving many challenges, but it cannot solve any of them alone. And this applies also to key educational challenges. This is why I will engage quickly and regularly with ministerial colleagues to promote joined up action to tackle pressing challenges. We will go some considerable distance, for example, in tackling educational underachievement if collectively we instituted an effective anti-poverty strategy. Three-quarters of school leavers do not leave education, they just leave school. Education is about more than schools, so we have to think holistically about the education experience students receive from their time in school, further education, higher education, or training. The boundaries of educational experience should not be limited by the administrative boundaries of government departments. The third principle is that the quality of teachers and teaching is key to developing a school system which works for all students. One of the implications I take from this lies in a quote which many of you will have heard from Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple Computers, when he said, "It doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do." And that's why I would move away from the top-down accountability system, which is a legacy of the Thatcherite belief in the power of markets and competition. This pits institution against institution when we need to promote a sense of the common good. This elevates narrow targets over real outcomes, incentivizes gaming behavior in pursuit of institutional interest, and at a system level, encourages focus on activity rather than a more considered examination of consequences. Fortunately, we have a mechanism through which these principles can be enacted. Even better, Northern Ireland Government has already committed itself to this approach. And what I'm referring to is the approach of outcomes-based accountability, or OBA. The basic principles involved in OBA are fairly straightforward. For any specific programme or initiative, we need to ask, what did we do? How well did we do it? How many people benefited? And have we improved the quality or delivery of our service? In the OBA framework, the easiest thing to measure is the top left-hand quadrant, what we did. But this is also the least important part of the programme. The hardest part to measure is the bottom right-hand quadrant. Are we making things better? But this is the most important part of any programme. And that's why when any new programme is to be announced while I am Minister of Education, the most important feature of the announcement will be on the difference, by which I mean the improvement it will seek to make. The next most important feature will be how we will try to achieve that improvement. And only then will we say how much money will be spent on the programme. Announcing we're going to spend lots of money is not a policy. Spending money is not a policy. Spending money is a way to resource a policy so that it makes a difference, but making a difference is what counts. We need to get away from a situation where we can spend over £1 billion to target social need without any sense of how it was used, whether it has made a difference, or even whether it is enough to tackle the problem. OBA also makes a very important distinction between programme impact and population impact. A programme is put in place to bring benefit to a defined group of people and transform the way we do some of what we do within education. We hope that it will have beneficial effects beyond those who are the direct recipients of the programme, but this broader impact cannot be guaranteed because that impact is affected by what others are doing. Complex problems cannot be solved by singular solutions, whether through education or anything else. In the same vein, education alone is not responsible for pressing social problems, so should not be burdened with sole responsibility for solving them. Education can and should make an important contribution to addressing complex social challenges, but it can do this more effectively when it is done in collaboration with other agencies of government and civil society. OBA also provides a good basis for judging whether we have in fact made a positive difference. It begins with a baseline and looks for positive change. However, a baseline is not a point, but a trend. An improvement is about changing the trend or turning the curve, not showing point-to-point change. So for example, if we want to use qualifications data as an indicator, we need to focus on changing the trend over years, not just increasing the level, as performance has been steadily increasing year on year for years. But even then, this is just an indicator, not an outcome. as the purpose of education is not just about, or should not be just about, squeezing as many GCSEs out of a youngster as possible. The purpose of education, all education, not just the bit we get in schools, is to provide every young person with the qualifications, skills, knowledge and attributes that will allow them to live fulfilled lives as citizens. And the test of whether we're achieving this is by looking at the outcomes of the whole educational journey followed by young people. There are many routes taken by young people through our education system, but currently we have most data on the outcomes for those who graduate from university. This seems to me to be completely the wrong order of priority. We should know more about the young people who our system has failed to equip and prepare for life as citizens, as that's where more focus and innovation is required. That's where we really do need to turn the curve. More generally, we need better to understand the outcomes from all the routes through education so that we can identify and promote the ones which seem to provide the most successful outcomes and transform or abandon the ones which seem to lead to unsatisfactory outcomes. This would also mean we have a better basis for allocating resources between the different parts of our education system. I said I would return to the issue of COVID to consider some of the new priorities that it has raised, and I want to return to this quote about the storm and the boats, as COVID has exacerbated existing inequalities, and in a very real sense, it has revealed the limitations to all we've been doing to address these inequalities previously. There is almost always disruption caused by emergencies, and sometimes this disruption endures. After the 2008 financial crash, young people who left education had worse employment outcomes than the cohort who had left education in 2007 and who would leave education in 2009. Furthermore, those worse outcomes for the 2008 cohort were sustained over time. Another lesson from financial crises is that businesses, through a combination often of support, resilience, and sheer willpower, can often survive during the crash but collapse during the period of recovery, partly because support measures are removed and partly because exhaustion sets in. The disruption caused by COVID has been very much greater, and it will affect all cohorts of young people in education, particularly those engaging in transitions. Talk about getting back to normal seems to me to be entirely misplaced. What we need is an extended period of support and encouragement and flexibility as we work with teachers and schools to understand the nature and scale of emerging challenges and work together to find ways to tackle those emerging challenges. And while we're doing that, we can start to think over the horizon about the type of education system we want for the future. Some of the immediate challenges seem to be fairly obvious. The fact that providing at least one decent meal a day to children became such an issue is a clear indication of the weakness of our response to tackling poverty. A huge infrastructure gap was revealed as it became clear that internet access for every household should be as ubiquitous as access to clean water and electricity. The fragility of too many public and civic institutions was revealed, mainly as a consequence of years of austerity and the mantra that efficiency was the only criterion that mattered. Perhaps as an alternative, we should lay out all the requirements we impose on schools in terms of class size, curriculum coverage, teacher qualifications, facilities, services and support. Then calculate the cost of meeting all these requirements, which in effect is the cost of providing every child with an effective education. Then compare the cost of providing an effective education with the budget we actually give to schools and calculate the difference. And then perhaps we can start to work out a way to fund schools properly. Questions have been asked about our qualifications and the way some level of low achievement appears to be designed into the distribution of grades. The qualification system may be overburdened with different purposes. They're used to assess the performance of schools. They're used to hold teachers accountable, and they're used to filter entry to the next stage of education. There's even a question on whether we need to have high stakes tests at age 16 anymore at all. This marks the end of compulsory education, but now the majority of schools stay in education rather than leave education, just to go into a variety of different places. And what about over the horizon? What type of system do we need for the 21st century? And what sort of features might we want to establish? Well, here are a couple of issues to consider when we're thinking about that. First of all, how about encouraging even more teacher collaboration? One of the most positive features of schools during the crisis was the way so many teachers shared resources and expertise and developed their own forms of professional development support. World-class education systems are characterized by teacher collaboration within and between schools, built on strong foundations of professional development activity. Already through the network of shared school improvement, we can see the potential for locally based teacher-led professional development as a model for the future. So one of the things we might want to think about for the future is how we can encourage even more of this, build on that gain from the crisis, that lesson learned from the crisis, and encourage even more teacher collaboration into the future. Secondly, how about establishing a more inclusive education system? There is clearly a rising sentiment for a more inclusive system. People are talking about it all the time. There are issues coming up in the Assembly on a regular basis on this issue. So this is something that we really have to give a lot of thought to. But despite that rising sentiment, there are significant challenges in how this might be achieved and the range of issues that need to be encompassed within it. Should we stop schools from using criteria which exclude certain categories of students or staff? Try to remove as many exclusionary criteria as possible. If a school admits a student, should that school be required to accept responsibility for that student throughout their school career? And more particularly, not be allowed to counsel them out to maintain institutional reputation? And should we actively encourage diversity within school communities? And if we do that, how should we do it? If diversity is a resource within schools, is a diversity of schools not also a resource within the system? Or to put it in a slightly different way, would anyone really want a single system of schools with someone like me in charge? What about the issue of special education needs? This is one of the most significant changes in the system over the last decade or more, with the number of students identified as having special needs has been rising steadily, and the number of students going to special schools has been rising steadily. This is a crucial issue which we have been struggling with for years, and dealing with this is absolutely central to creating a truly inclusive system. A third issue to think about in relation to establishing an inclusive system: how about listening to students and young people more? Adults sometimes act as if young people are a problem and we need to use schools somehow or other to fix them. But when young people in Northern Ireland are asked about the society around them, what do they say? Well, only a fifth of them, 20%, think that Northern Ireland is a place where people respect one another. Only 10% say that they have any influence over decisions that are made about what happens in Northern Ireland. And only marginally more than this say they have any influence over decisions that are made about what happens in the area in which they live. Perhaps the reality is that young people see the problem as lying among the adults, and in the fact that adults all too rarely, if ever, listen to them. So maybe we need to listen to students and young people an awful lot more than we currently do. So as we think about the future, and as we think about what life might be like over the horizon, let's hope that all the talk about building back better isn't just talk, and that it will be followed by real transformative action. And let's also remember that a key part of transformation lies in our expectations about what is possible. In 1955, the report of the Committee on Secondary School Examinations declared that, and I quote, "The great majority of pupils at secondary intermediate schools probably are not intellectually equipped to pass any worthwhile examination." Only a few years later, a document on the curriculum for schools in Northern Ireland recommended that 13-year-old boys should be taught applied science and craft subjects, while 13-year-old girls should be taught domestic science and homekeeping, presumably as preparation for their intended future lives. As a society, we struggle to deal with the legacies of our past, yet we have one of the best history curriculums in the world for dealing with the contested past and some of the most committed and engaged history teachers. The problem is that far too few study history beyond age 14 years, and that creates space which is readily filled by partisan versions of the past. We've had 2 decades of devolved government in shared political institutions, but we often appear to be fighting the same old battles over and over again. Given what we've heard about the views of young people, is it any surprise that they have the lowest level of voting in comparison to older cohorts? Yet we have a citizenship curriculum which is a work of genius in how it equips young people to engage in the great conversation we've always needed about the type of society we want. The problem is that it is probably the lowest status of any subject in the entire curriculum, and we really ought to worry about something like that. We have the tools within our education system to transform the way we work towards a better future. The crisis showed we have teachers with extraordinary levels of commitment to the best interests of the young people in their care. And we have amazing energy and commitment among so many young people working and hoping for a better future. But do the rest of us believe that things should be different and better, and the commitment to help make them different and better? Some of you may remember a Roald Friars cartoon in which a child asked his father, "What did you do during the Troubles, Daddy?" He was asking people to think about the legacy their acts might leave for future generations. The educational philosopher Neil Postman made a similar point when he said, and I quote, "Children are the messages we send to a world we will never see." Children are the messages we will send to a world we will never see. I think most teachers know the messages they want to bequeath to the future through their students. But every politician and adult in Northern Ireland might ask themselves what message they want to bequeath to the future and what they should do now for the children who will bear those messages. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. I'm delighted to welcome 4 amazing leaders to respond to Tony's presentation. Each respondent will have 3 minutes, and I welcome you to put any comments and thoughts into the chat function. I'm sure you've all read about each of our panelists in your invitation, so I'm going to now give a short introduction to each panelist, and I'm so looking forward to hearing their thoughts. So Michelle Corky graduated as a music teacher from the University of Ulster. She has over 28 years experience as a teacher and a leader. She successfully led the amalgamation of 3 schools in Lurgan to create St. Ronan's College, which is the largest all-ability grammar school in Northern Ireland. Michelle was appointed the Director of Education for the Education Authority in 2019 and has spoken publicly about her vision of wanting all children to be happy and to belong to an inclusive learning environment, the need for all schools to be fit for purpose, and for those young people to have clear pathways for their future, and for that to be easily accessible. Michelle, as our first panelist, you are very welcome, and I invite you to respond to Minister Tony's presentation.
Thank you very much, Brona. I'm just sorry I have only 3 minutes to respond because it's so thought-provoking. But as Minister of Education, Minister Gallagher, thank you for your inspirational words. And for me, your role is very simple. Your role is to provide all of our young people with an education that makes them the best version of them that they can absolutely be. So if I imagine myself, and if I even quote Martin Luther King, actually, I have a dream. I'm a 4-year-old and I'm going into school for the first time. And I've been told this is going to be the best opportunity of my life. And it's going to be so exciting and so fulfilling. So, Minister, what I'm asking you is, what are my expectations? What is my dream? So I run through the door keen and eager to learn what is my dream. What boat am I in? Am I in the boat that's going to provide me with opportunity despite the school that I go to? Am I in the boat that comes from a background where I have no support and no quality or child poverty, and I'm in that situation? So what my expectation is that you are going to turn me into a confident young learner and I will be treated as an individual. You won't ask me how clever I am, but you will ask me, how am I clever? So my expectation as a 4-year-old, whatever boat I'm in, is that I am taught by teachers who can adapt to my needs, who are trained to meet my needs, who will treat me with respect, who will give me a love of learning and not test me within an inch of my life, who will develop my skills. And I'm so pleased to hear you say about citizenship, because all of those skills and critical thinking and resilience and citizenship, they are what our young people need at this time. COVID has presented us with many, many difficulties, but it has provided us with many, many opportunities. And as you say, collaboration has absolutely opened the doors for us. I don't think assessment for learning has thrived as much as it has under COVID situations. And as a teacher, and I will always be a teacher, but I was in classrooms in 2014 observing lessons where flipped classrooms were being used very effectively. And now it's the go-to word. We talk about flipped classrooms. Flipped classrooms is one of the tools we can use to move forward and engage our young people in a much, much more meaningful way. I'm moving into an education system where it doesn't matter what stage of my development I'm at, I will get the help and support that I need at a time that I need it, not when the system decides that I need it, but actually when I need it, whatever difficulty it is that I face, because I, as the child, am the center of our education system. I'm taught in a school building that's fit for purpose, that allows me the freedom to roam and to play and to be safe, given that we're now in the 21st century and the dangers that brings about. I'm supported by a joined up system. And I'm so relieved to hear you say this evening that if we don't join up our thinking with the Department of Health and all of those other, education cannot deal with the situation that we're all in now. It has to be a joined up approach. And that's what COVID has shown, that if we work more effectively together, we can actually provide a better system. But fundamentally, as you say, the strategic policy that supports our system is absolutely vital. A curriculum that is flexible, that will develop my skills, that does not just provide quick fixes in pilots, that silver bullet that you talked about, but actually has a long-term strategic vision for moving forward. So what I'm saying is our new generation has got new needs, new requirements, and we have a unique opportunity now to harness the fantastic wealth of creativity that our system has provided and generate and direct that in putting the child at the center. We are in the 21st century. We need a digital strategy for moving forward. We need to fund our system to react and deliver differently. But what I'm saying is we need to work together to improve our education system. There's nothing new. We've said this before, but this time, let's make a difference. Let's work together and not hold each other publicly accountable for the ills that have been done, but let's work together to create a system that puts the child at the very center, regardless of the boat that they find themselves in. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
Don't know how I did for time there, Brona.
You're okay. Now, we were supposed to have a really super countdown clock on, but there's been a bit of a technical hitch.
Okay, so I couldn't see it, sure. So I was just hoping that I wasn't.
You did very well indeed, Michelle. Listen, Glenda is next. So Dr. Glenda Walsh. Glenda graduated from Queen's University in Belfast. Her interests and expertise focus on play and playful pedagogies in early childhood and primary education. She's been involved in many major research projects, guiding the course of the foundation stage of the revised curriculum in Northern Ireland. She headed a major project examining the pedagogy in early years childhood education in the Republic of Ireland. She is a reviewer for the International Journal of Childcare and Education Policy, Early Years Childhood Research and Practice. Glenda, you are very, very welcome. And could you please give us your response? No. Glenda there? No. Oh, she's here, of course.
Yes,
There
I'm
you
here
are,
now.
Glenda.
Yes,
You're there.
good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Tony, for a fascinating presentation. An education minister, what I took principally from your presentation was the fact that we want to have an education system that is inclusive in perspective and meets with the needs of all our young learners and is much more than just qualifications, but ensures that they can have a whole and worthwhile life and fulfilled life in so many ways. And that's what we hold dear. When I put my early years hat on, that's what I hold dear in the field of early years education. Our mantra in the field of early years is that we want to develop children to be happy and healthy in their lives today, but to develop the skills to be engaged, creative, lifelong learners for tomorrow. And to enable us to do this, we have to very much invest in what is important in getting that curriculum right in the early years. And I would argue strongly from an early years perspective, to get that curriculum right for our young learners, we need something that's much more than academic outcomes and is assessment driven in that perspective. And we need something that's very play-based and playful in perspective, that allows our children to think outside the box, to be the creative learners for the future, rather than simply doing examinations and to meet the needs of someone else rather than their own needs in that respect. And to enable us to do it, and again, Tony, you touched upon this, the need for creative teachers. And we need to invest in our teachers. And again, within the field of early years education, we need to invest in an early years workforce. We need to invest in those early years teachers who are highly skilled, who are playful in perspective, and who really want to work with the children and support their learning. And therefore, to enable us to do that, we need to ensure that we have a pay structure in place that really does meet with the early years staff's needs and attracts them into a profession, rather than them thinking of an option of, do I go into hair or do I opt for care? We need the best teachers in the field of early years, the best teachers to ensure our children get the best start. And also on top of that, we need to invest in our families. We need to invest in upskilling our parents to enable them to work with their children right from the outset, to value what's right for children and to support them in the process. And I really think it's that combination of curriculum, workforce, and supporting families right from that moment of birth to enable all young children, irrespective of their background, to get the best and fairest start in their education system.
Thank you very much, Glenda. Well done. Dr. Patricia Olin, or Trish, is next. Trish is currently the Special Advisor to the Justice Minister for Northern Ireland. She is an elected Alliance Councillor for Mid and East Antrim. Trish is an experienced chair with a demonstrated history in the research industry. She is skilled in strategic planning and has a particular interest and expertise in educational underachievement and systems of support. She was a congressional intern for Senator John McCain and has recently achieved a doctorate of philosophy and education from Queen's University in Belfast. Trish gave an excellent and extremely inspiring presentation at the NEU International Women's Day event. For those of you who missed that, you can find that on the NEU website. Trish, you are very, very welcome. Can you please give us your thoughts?
I can, Brona. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I hope I can live up to it. First of all, I want to say it's a bit of a caveat. I'm speaking this evening not in an alliance capacity, but in a personal academic capacity. I'm not speaking on behalf of the party, but seeing as I'm a special political advisor at the minute, Minister Gallagher, I'd like to speak to you in that capacity. And the first thing I want to say is I absolutely adored your metaphor that we're not, or that we've all been through the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And as your special advisor, the first thing I would like to say to you is that there are some young people, a significant number of which in Northern Ireland, who haven't even been in a boat, who have been put out in a dinghy, or perhaps without even armbands in a sea storm that we cannot even imagine. These young people have been pushed out of the system through informal exclusion mechanisms such as reduced timetables, encouraged absences, rolling suspensions, isolation, or indeed referral into dubious and indeed unqualified alternative education mechanisms. I would say to you, Minister, I applaud and follow your principles, particularly the one that there are no silver bullets. But I would also say we are in dangerous political waters. We're in a situation where the aspirational ideal of ensuring inclusivity is little more than a pipe dream. And the reason that I say that is because these young people who are pushed out of the system aren't even formally recognised in our official statistics. And without that statistical basis, what do we know? We know nothing. So although our system is far from perfect, it's fundamentally broken. But what I would also say, Minister, is that in my capacity as special advisor, I've researched and I've experienced centres of what I would call our unrecognised excellence. Centres where children and young people are educated together without so much of a political eyebrow raised about integrated education or separate education systems. Places where children with a full spectrum of needs are educated while they're on a shoestring budget, where we're catering for a range of needs of special educational needs, social and emotional and behavioural difficulties, right down to autism and other complex needs. Centres which are recognised officially by the education system as education other than at school or alternative education. What I would say to you, Minister, is there's a really famous academic who I'm sure you know because you're much more learned than me, called Roger Slee, who often says that if we want to recognise inclusivity in education, the first thing we need to do is step back and take stock. We need to first identify and put forward provisions for recognising exclusion and dismantling exclusion and the invisible mechanisms of exclusion that manifest in education. And what I would say to you, Minister, is take your mandate by the neck. I would say go in and say, I'm going to legislate to abolish the use of school exclusion as a disciplinary practice. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to put forward policy positions that recognise our schools are not excluding or informally removing young people because they want to. They're doing that in order to cope. I would put forward policy positions that regulate the use of informal exclusions, manage moves, reduce timetables, seclusion units, referrals into alternative education. And I would then ask them to work with me. I would resource them to audit the extent to which they use these mechanisms. And then I would formally move towards resourcing the continuum of educational provision made available to our schools to enable them to work with our most disenfranchised learners, our educationally disappeared. And last but not least, I would brand yourself as the saviour for education, because if you can pull this off, Minister Gallagher, I will be your minister until your special political advisor until the end of time. And last but not least, can I say, if you do make education minister, come the end of October, I'm looking for employment, so please keep me in mind. Thank you.
Well said, Trish. Thank you very much indeed. Last but not least, Festina. Festina Graham. Festina began her career as an English teacher and has worked in a series of leadership roles, such as Policy Director for Integrated Education and for Irish Medium Schools, as a lead inspector for English with ETI. She has been instrumental in driving initiatives to ensure pupils get more involved in creative learning, and has driven the development of policy with regards to the curriculum, qualifications and standards. In September 2020, Festina was appointed Chief Inspector of the Educational Training Inspectorate for the Department of Education. She brings a wealth of experience to this post, and her appointment has been greatly welcomed by NEU. Now, I don't want to use a pun, but as the inspector always has the last word, Faustina, you are very welcome, and we are keen to hear what you have to say in response to Tony.
Thank you very much, Bruna. I'm just relieved that the timer isn't working on this occasion. And if I can begin, like other colleagues, by thanking you, Tony, for the insights that you've provided for us this evening. And I suppose, as Bruna said, as Chief Inspector, my role is actually to provide you as Minister with policy advice. And I provide you with that policy advice on the basis of what is actually happening in our education system today and hopefully in the future. And so in responding, rather than I think dwelling on everything that has happened in the past year, I'd like to focus on the practicalities of how we ensure that over, say, the next 3 years, that we move forward confidently and optimistically, rather than, as you said, become potentially overwhelmed and actually, as you said, crash during the recovery, because I think that's the one thing that we absolutely want to avoid. And I think for us in ETI, what we have been able to do over the past year is actually to track across that time how our schools and how our colleges have responded repeatedly and innovatively to unforeseen challenges that, let's face it, no one could have even anticipated even just a month before the pandemic struck. Simultaneously, what we have seen actually happen is that our schools and colleges have banked each new piece of knowledge, and then they've applied it to the next unforeseen situation, often despite evident impact and cost to themselves. So I think collectively at system level, what I would advise you to do is to focus very explicitly on celebrating and endorsing the skills of our teachers and leaders and lecturers, because I think they've proved beyond doubt in the past year that they are adaptable, that they're resilient. And I actually think for the first time in a while, Minister, I would say that they have had the opportunity to be absolutely fearless in doing what they believe to be the best thing for the young people in their care. So I think on that basis, we now need to encourage them to build on that confidence, to do what is right for all of those learners, rather than, as you suggested, simply to comply with the minister's policies without question. We always have to question, and we always have to do that. I think the other thing you said that I think is hugely important is that we have to be so careful that we continue to retain a really holistic view of a young person's development. Again, I think there's that danger that we can fragment education, even currently, into a sense where we have emotional health and well-being versus learning, or emotional health and well-being versus qualifications, rather than looking at all of it, as you suggested, Tony, really very much as that holistic approach to how a young person, and Michelle touched on it too, develops right across the education sphere. I think we can do that actually by implementing our curriculum to its optimum. And again, you touched on all those things, Tony, the important elements of the curriculum. We introduced it. It is still very relevant, but I don't think that we have implemented it to its optimum in the past. We've reverted sometimes to what is familiar and to what people recognise. But I think we can do that, and I think our statutory curriculum will absolutely allow you to design your curriculum offer, taking into account what works for you, and, for example, beginning to draw on some of the things that Tony has been talking about tonight. But most importantly, I think, as some of our other speakers have focused on, I think we have to support the implementation of that curriculum with a focus on professional learning. I find the generosity of spirit from school to school, from college to college, from teacher to teacher and lecturer to lecturer absolutely inspirational across the last year. And I think there are questions then for government within that. So for me, for example, what I'm thinking about is, how do we integrate the self-generated work that was developed by teachers for teachers into the more formal, wide-ranging DE learning leaders strategy, without stifling the innovation, the independence, or the risk-taking that was involved in the work that people actually did in that self-generated work. And I suppose finally, I think as we begin the task, I think it's about asking ourselves, and I'm doing currently this in my own organisation, but I think as educational professionals, saying to ourselves, so why do we do what we actually do? And begin to answer that question, as you suggested, Tony. collectively and collaboratively. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Festina. Now, interestingly, we've had loads and loads of chat, going on, and some questions. One question, one bit of interest has come up more than others, and that's, is there really a need for GCSEs? So I'm thinking that might be a topic for a future webinar. Okay, so just to let you know, now what we have done is we have recorded this, so this will be available on our website within the next few days. I really want to thank you very much for a thought-provoking webinar. I'd like to thank Tony for his presentation, and Michelle, Glenda, Trish and Festina for your responses. And also for your support, because it's really good that, we asked you to do this and there was no issue at all. You all just said yes. So thank you very much for that. I'd also like to thank Alistair and Mark for their support and for their expertise, and Teresa and Simon for all the help that went into promoting and organising this event. We would welcome further comments or any questions, and you can do that through the info@neu.org.uk. Listen, thank you all very much for your time. I hope that everyone attending has enjoyed it and that you all have a pleasant evening. All the best. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Brona. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.